The secret to finding great fantasy football defense plays on a weekly basis is to not draft a defense if you don't have to. The reason why is because when you actually attach draft capital to a defense, that is going to make you feel more attached and less likely to let go of a defense if they're even playing bad. Defense is one of the most fluid positions along with kickers in fantasy football, which is why I'm not only one of the only ones who does weekly defense rankings during the actual fantasy football season, but I can also tell you, don't draft them because it's just not a good idea to attach yourself to a high variance position. So that's why we're going through the top 12 defense rankings today for 2024 fantasy football to give you a good blueprint of who I believe will finish as the top 12 defenses. And this week's winner of the free FFN hat is Scott McKenzie, JM8XE. Scott, you have won the free FFN hat. Their sleeper wide receiver was Khalil Shakir. So Scott, email me at Football Fanalysts Network and I'm still giving them away. And the way to qualify to get one is to go down there, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and give me your favorite sleeper wide receiver to take this year. So let's go ahead and start diving into these rankings right now. And I'm going to start by saying there was a change. For me, the Cowboys were at number 1 for basically the entire offseason. I actually ended up moving them down, and I'll explain why in a little bit. The Ravens are now my number 1 defense here. Look, when I looked at the Ravens and the Dallas Cowboys, what I said to myself is they're both great defensive cultures. Like, over the past several years, the Cowboys have been elite on defense, and really over the duration of like 20 years, the Ravens have been an elite defensive culture. And they're both getting new defensive coordinators. Obviously, Dallas has Mike Zimmer, who may not be the most likable head coach, but knows how to coach a defense really well. And then when we're looking at Baltimore, they've got Zach Orr, who was a former player, had his career cut short on the Baltimore Ravens because of a neck injury. I believe in both of their abilities to call defense. What separated me from having the Cowboys at 1 and moving them down to 2 is that when I looked at the Cowboys, they've got a lot of injuries. Not only is Deron Bland going to miss the start of the season, he's on IR because he just got surgery. He may well miss more than 4 games. Their linebackers are, like, a lot of them are injured right now. So the Cowboys are not exactly like this clean bill of health, and their linebackers not that deep because some of their backups actually are injured right now too. So it makes me question what their start of the season is going to look like. And I think that's probably going to make a difference between these two teams because I believe the Ravens will be just as good as the Cowboys. They'll be right there step in step. So it really will come down to injuries. So when I look at the Ravens, they're not really injured. Aside from Kyle Hamilton, who is going to be fine. But just looking at the talent that each team has, they're both extremely talented. So I think it just matters just enough who's out there right now, and I don't think that the Cowboys are going to be at full health to start the season, and you typically don't get healthier as the season goes on. So obviously they're both going to be great. That's why they're in tier 1, but that's why I moved the Ravens up. Now dropping down to the next tier here, the Raiders just moved up for me again. Oh my God, I'm so big on the Raiders defense this year, guys. I heard a lot of people say that the Raiders were sleeper defense, and I said, for a lot of people who don't pay super close attention, I can understand why it's sleeper. If you've been watching my channel, I've been shouting about the Raiders defense all offseason, dating back to March. I am so big on the Raiders defense this year. Not only were they really good last year, ended up finishing as a top 5 defense last year, they added Christian Wilkins in free agency. I don't know if people understand and grasp how big of a free agent signing that is. People like Christian Wilkins do not hit the free agent market. So the Raiders getting him at that front 7, it's going to open up so much for Max Crosby. That defensive line is going to be a nightmare for opponents. So I think their front 7 is going to just cause so much havoc. Not only going to get a lot of sacks, I think they're going to force a lot of turnovers. I think they'll get a lot of fumble recoveries. I think they'll get a lot of interceptions from their secondary as a result of bad and forced throws because of that front 7. So the Raiders here, they're just really peaking right now. And I think their offense is going to do so bad, but I think it's what their defense will do that will dictate how they do this year. And I think that the Raiders defense is going to keep them in a lot of close games this year. Now dropping down to 4. The 49ers also moved down for me. So again, when I looked at the Raiders versus the 49ers, it really did have to do with, again, the 49ers have some injury issues on that side of the ball. Dre Greenlaw obviously had one of the most brutal injuries that I have ever seen on a football field when he was jogging onto the freaking field during the Super Bowl last year and he tore his Achilles. So obviously he's not going to be ready to start the year. He may come back at some point. It's going to be a while, though. So that middle of the defense is Fred Warner, and cross your fingers a little bit. And with the 49ers, I ultimately believe that they'll have a better year this year. Because with the 49ers, now they get rid of Steve Wilks, bring in Nick Sorensen as their defensive coordinator. And I'm not saying Nick Sorensen's great, but I think he's better than Steve Wilks. I think that was addition by subtraction there. And obviously, they've got a lot of talent. They've obviously got a great secondary. They had over an interception per game last year, and they were forcing a lot of sacks as well. So I think the 49ers just take a good leap this year. And then number 5, the Browns defense here is my number 5 defense because I do believe in the front end talent. Now, I will say that their front end talent is getting older. And of course, I'm discussing Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward. They are getting older, and Denzel Ward is actually dealing with a little bit of an injury right now. But what I'll say is they're still, I would say, towards the back of the prime of their careers right here. And one big thing that I think is going to matter with this Browns defense is I actually do believe that AFC North may not be as explosive offensively as a lot of people think they will. The Steelers, we know, are going to be horrible on offense. We also know that the Ravens' offensive line is not as good as it has been in years past. So I think the Browns will up that sack number to above 3 per game. And I think they have a strong chance to get those interceptions per game up to about like 1.5 interceptions per game. So I trust the Browns defense ultimately still. And those are my top 5 defenses, but I cannot tell you enough. Do not draft these defenses. If you want to draft so bad, you should hop in an underdog best ball draft because Best Ball Mania is the highest upside best ball draft that you can get in where you have the chance to win more than $1 million. And those spots are filling up fast. Like, you're not going to be able to draft much longer in that league. So if you do want to draft on underdog today in Best Ball Mania, use the link in the comments below. And when you use code FFN to deposit at least $10, they will give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 in free bonus cash. And you'll also be able to get in on the free Travis Kelce line, which is him having more than half a yard in week 1. So that's obviously a free line, and you can go take advantage of it and draft on underdog today. Now, moving down to the next tier here, I've got the Bills defense at 6, and the Chiefs rose up to number 7 here. So the Bills fell for me. They actually fell an entire tier. And it's not because, like, I'm all of a sudden off of their defensive, like, depth chart or anything like that. My issue with the Bills is I think that, like, they're just getting older, and they do have weaknesses that I see in their secondary. Like, Damar Hamlin is their starting safety right now. And obviously he's a big name because of the unfortunate situation he had a couple years ago, but he's really not that great of a player. And he's actually injured right now as well. Like, that secondary is just not a particularly strong one. And when I look at the Bills defense, what ultimately keeps them inside of the top 10 for me is that Sean McDermott knows how to coach a defense. Like, there's a reason they got 3 sacks per game last year. He knows how to scheme well, and they obviously have a good front 7. There's a reason they got over an interception per game last year too. They're a defensive culture in Buffalo, so I ultimately do believe in Sean McDermott's ability to coach a defense. Not as wild on their personnel department, though, in my opinion. Now, the Chiefs defense, they are a shoo-in for a top 10 spot, in my opinion, even though they've got a tough schedule, simply because the Chiefs defense is run by freaking Steve Spagnuolo. Steve Spagnuolo is an elite defensive coordinator. He gets paid a lot of money because he has been so responsible for helping them win Super Bowls. And the thing that only holds me back with the Chiefs is they did lose 2 key players on that defensive side of the ball. They lost Willie Gay at the linebacker position, which is a very overlooked loss because they lost L'Jarius Sneed. L'Jarius Sneed is obviously the bigger name player. Willie Gay in the middle of that defense, that's a pretty big loss. What they do have is Trent McDuffie coming into his own, and they've also got Nick Bolton returning for this year. So I just ultimately believe Steve Spagnuolo finds a way to keep this defense getting over 3 sacks per game, getting an interception per game, and getting you close to like 8.5, 9 fantasy points per game by the end of the year. And then to round out this tier, the Jets defense are at 8 here, and really it's just a question for me that the Jets moved down because I don't like at all, what's going on with Hassan Reddick right now. Hassan Reddick, they traded for him during the offseason, and he just requested a trade from the Jets because he wants more money. Well, the irony of the situation is this dude wanted more money before they traded for him. So it's like, what did you expect was going to happen? Like, that just seems like such a bad move, like, by the front office to me. So I just always question, like, the Jets' ability to, like, dig themselves out of their own hole. But obviously the Jets defense is really, really stacked with talent. Like, you've got the Williams brothers, Quincy and Quinnen Williams at that front 7 shoring it up. You've got Sauce Gardner in the back It's like they've got a lot of good things going for them. They also have the number 4 strength of schedule for any defense this year. So the Jets defense coming into the year, I do believe that they ultimately will be good because they're defensive culture first, and they've got a lot of talent on that defense. So I still have them here at number 8 inside this tier. Now dropping down to the last tier right here, I've got the Eagles defense. Oh man, I can't tell you enough how much I keep wanting to raise the Eagles defense. There are so many things I like about the Eagles defense. Number 1, they have Vic Fangio now. So last year, when they were bad on defense, they were run by Matt Patricia. Like, he was calling the defensive plays last year for the Philadelphia Eagles, and of course they were atrocious towards the end of the year. Everything changes with Vic Fangio, who originally they were gonna get last year. He ended up going to Miami. Now they have Vic Fangio here, and they've got, obviously, Jalen Carter coming into his second year. They have made a lot of personnel moves on that defensive side of the ball, specifically at the corner position, because their secondary last year was horrible. Now, what keeps me from moving up the Eagles defense is because they are really reliant on 2 rookie corners. That is the whole reason I can't move the Eagles defense into the next tier, because I want to so bad, and I think this defense has a tremendous amount of upside. Numbers don't support it from last year, obviously, but I can tell you that this defense is going to be pulled together really quick by Vic Fangio, and it really does depend on whether or not they're a top 10 defense or a top 5 defense. It really does depend on those 2 corners that they are really reliant on. And the Texans defense is at number 10 here as well. They ended up moving up here because I also want to move up the Texans defense a lot too. The Texans defense run by DeMeco Ryans, elite defensive coach, and just building an elite culture over there. So obviously they have Will Anderson in his second year. I believe he'll take a leap, in part because they have Daniel Hunter there right now to help take a lot of pressure off Will Anderson. So I think that front 7 is in really good shape. They've also got Derek Stingley in that cornerback position, who's just going to be extremely locked down again, and he's a ball hawk whenever the ball is in the air. So this defense is just so, it's the glue that holds them together is DeMeco Ryans here. So I ultimately just believe in this defensive culture that the Houston Texans are building, and I think coming into another year with a good quarterback to help take the pressure off the defense, because that matters a lot for defenses, I think they take another leap this year, and I could easily see them being like a top 5 defense at some point. Now the Chargers defense also moved up to 11 here because, very similar to the Eagles and the Texans, I could easily see a world where the Chargers defense is a really good defense by the end of the year. Look, what's hilarious about the Chargers, probably not to a Chargers fan, but what's funny to me about the Chargers situation is that they have had talent on this defense forever. They've had Derwin James. They've had Joey Bosa. They've had Khalil Mack now. And they still couldn't, be a good fantasy defense. Why? Because Brandon Staley sucks. That's why. So he gets tossed aside. Obviously, the players just said, we're not playing for you anymore. You're not our coach anymore. So he gets tossed aside last year after an embarrassing loss on Thursday Night Football to the Raiders. Now, obviously, what they needed was a stable head coach who was going to stabilize the building and continue to invest in the defense. They got that with Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh immediately comes in and he stabilizes the defense because what he does is 2 things very well. Runs it down your throat and plays really good, tough defense. They've got the personnel, they have the talent, they just needed the right coach, and they got it this year. That's why I believe the Chargers defense takes a big leap this year. And to round it out at number 12, I initially had the Steelers here. The Steelers have one of the most brutal schedules of the entire season. And while their defensive culture, I don't like their personnel, I ended up moving the Bears up to number 12. Now, the Chicago Bears defense is a unique defense as well because I do believe that they have a variance to finish a lot higher than this. I think the Chicago Bears could be like a top 6, top 7 defense in fantasy because last year the numbers don't really tell the story for the full season. Once they got a hold of Montez Sweat, that sack number started going up. Before Montez Sweat, they were not really pressuring the quarterback at all. But once they got Montez Sweat, a lot of things changed for that front 7. So obviously he comes in, he's going to be a really good pass rusher this year, and he's going to put a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. They've also got TJ Edwards to shore up the middle of that defense as well. And I ultimately do think that Matt Eberflus is a decent defensive coach, which is why I have the Bears actually going above the Steelers at this point because they're not going to have one of the hardest schedules in the actual NFL. So looking at them compared to the Steelers, I just believe in the personnel and the coaching a little bit more and the strength of schedule than I do the Steelers. And that not only says a lot about the Bears, that says a lot about the Steelers as well. So let me know what you think of the rankings in the comments below. And if you want to see the top 36 running back rankings for 2024, click on this video right here.